Joining us to make sense of all of this is Wilson Erumebor. He's a senior economist in the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Thank you, Mr. Erumebor, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Abel Usim. He is the founder of Youth Empowerment and Growth Initiative Lagos, YEGI for short. Thank you, Mr. Usim, for also joining us. All right, so before we connect to him, let's begin with you, Wilson. Reading some of the commitments laid out by the President at the recent UN Assembly, the question that arises is, what makes this set of pledges different to others that have gone before now?
Well, one thing to note is that, of course, poverty has been a major challenge within the continent and even in Nigeria. And given that Nigeria is the largest economy, has the largest population within the continent, it also has the largest number of poor people in the continent. So that tells you that there is an urgent need for government to be able to set this as a priority to say how best can we be able to reduce these numbers of people living below the poverty line. So I think it's just a matter of necessity that the government is made that statement as to wanting to reduce close to 100 million people out of poverty within the next decade. Whether that is possible or not is a whole debate entirely. But again, in a sense, it's needed. I mean, it should be the priority for every government, including that of Nigeria.
Right. We're still trying to establish contact with Abel Usim, who will be joining us in this conversation. But before we do that, what would you say is the key to eradicating poverty in Nigeria? We've been having this conversation. There are data figures suggesting that, we are still at a very bad place. What's the way forward?
Well, first of all, I think it is very clear, and several reports agencies have said and showed that the fastest way out of poverty is through jobs. Government can, in a sense, introduce a lot of all these support programs for the poor and vulnerable citizens. But how sustainable are these programs? So it then means that jobs is the most sustainable way out of poverty. And so what we must then do, if you look at the past decade, the economy has expanded, particularly in the early 2000s. We've been able to expand at a growing at a faster rate. But then this also means that even poverty and unemployment were also increasing during that period. So we must, as much as we must try to improve growth, economic growth within the economy, we must also see how to ensure that growth is inclusive. And what that means is paying attention to some key sectors that, have the potential to employ more people, sectors that have the potential to be able to, ensure that people generate income for themselves. And I think that's particularly one area that we haven't really done much in the last few decades. So as directly to answer your question, I think issues relating to how businesses can grow, particularly the small businesses. What are the intervention programs in place to be able to increase level of productivity across several businesses, whether it's in the agriculture, manufacturing, construction, because these are sectors that have the potential to employ larger number of people in the economy. So I think a lot more emphasis needs to be directed towards, first of all, achieving high economic growth. Secondly, ensuring that growth is inclusive. By that, I mean paying attention to the sectors that contribute to growth. And thirdly is on productivity. To ensure that whatever resources goes into a sector, we are able to generate more and more output out of that resources or investment. And I think all these three measures would go a long way to ensure that Nigerians, are able to secure jobs. Unfortunately, what that means with COVID, it's going to be a lot more challenging. Currently, we have close to 80 million people, below the poverty line, as estimated by the NBS, which is about 40% of the population. By the end of this year, obviously, it's going to increase. That number would certainly increase. So it's a bit more going to be more challenging at the same time. But then I think government needs to step up and ensure that interventions for these sectors, are swiftly implemented.
Okay. All right, let me bring Abel Usim into this conversation. Thank you, Abel, for joining us. Can Abel hear me? All right, we'll just continue with you, Wilson. I'm afraid that we're not able to connect to him yet. But again, why is the poverty alleviation conversation not an optional policy, but rather a pursuit of enlightened self-interest? What's your thought on that, Wilson?
Well, I think that that's relating to the governance issues within the country. So, for instance, you want to cite a project rather than look at where is the optimum or the best place to cite this project, for it to be able to meet its, objectives. So political sentiments then come in. So even on things relating to contracts, you get to. So I think those are governance issues that are very critical. They are sort of like foundations to every economic or social policy that you have within the country. So and I think over the years we've seen that played out across different sectoral policies and interventions going on. Even there are times when even some of these monies, issues of accountability and transparency then come up. So I think it's more of a question of the kinds of leaders that we have that have governed the country over the years. And I think right now, with this social and economic implications of poverty, the fact that if you don't build these roads, if you don't give people these jobs, at the end of the day, they would come back to haunt you. Even you would not be safe. If you don't invest in healthcare, invest in education, at the end of the day, with COVID, for instance, we've seen how a lot of times people would travel out of Nigeria to seek for, some of these health services. But now with COVID, you can't go anywhere. So the real message there is for you to develop your home. There's no place like home. And if you don't do that, at the end of the day, it will come back to haunt you, whatever your status is in the society. So I think our political leaders need to be able to ensure that whatever is meant for the people gets to the people. Whatever you've committed to ensure that people have good infrastructure, good education, good healthcare, it must be delivered, because if it doesn't, it would come at a cost to those that have neglected or to those that haven't done what they are supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I think you have put it very well there. Whatever is meant for the people gets to the people.